Alright, Noah, so today what we're going to do is we'll do a tree site inspection, but before that I want to walk around the park here and see if we can find some things that I would look for in the tree. So things that are going to make me worry to climb, and things that I would point out and make sure that I'm aware of before I even attempt to try to climb the tree. Alright, so we're going to do some clips prior to the tree inspection. Okie doke. Okay, so on a tree site inspection, Noah, one of the other things, the most important thing would be electricity. So a lot of times you'd want to see that first. So here's an example of the electrical lines, and just say these top lines with those discs, those are insulators. And you can see the metal lines that connect to them. That way you know that's definitely voltage. So that's the very top of the line. Now if you follow that, there's some more insulators. They're on smaller little spools. Okay, so now they're connected to this line that goes to the house. Alright, but it is wrapped. It's wrapped around a metal cord. It's like a triplex line, so it is somewhat insulated. If you had one of these service drops going into or through a tree, it's not necessarily at risk, but you would want to make sure that if it is through a tree, that it hadn't been rubbed enough to make that insulation go like break through it, and you would tell by maybe black marks on the tree. So for sure you'd want to pay attention to that, and especially where the connecting point is. If say a tree was growing up the pole and it was near where they're connecting, well, that could be underpowered, so you'd want to be careful of that. Now the lines that are further down, if you go drop down, those are like communication lines and cables, so those really don't normally have power, but you pay attention to those. Now if you see where that cable line is, now you go to the pole, you'll see these wires that are connected and they come downward on the line here. So these are actually guy wires and not really full of power, but you can see, you can distinguish a guy wire doesn't have insulators at the pole, it's connected to metal, and then further down it'll have a rectangular insulator. So if at any point electricity went down the pole, down this wire, it would stop at that point. Those are guy wires, not normally having electricity, but you'd still want to pay attention to them. Cool? Alright, and another thing is something like this bench. It's an above ground target. So taking large limbs, if a limb came straight down and hit it, you could chip it. It's kind of an important thing. You want to make sure that you're aware of above ground objects. Okay, so another thing that you'd want to pay attention to are in-ground objects. So let's say like a water meter. Sometimes some places might have lights to show up onto the tree. They could be in the ground that you might not notice. Although this is a small tree, if it were a large tree, you would still want to pay attention to in-ground objects. Here's an example of something you'd want to look for. You can see the bees coming in and out of a tree, and this one happens to be at the base. Sometimes it's up in the canopy. So if you were on the ground, you'd look up, and if you saw something like that, not only that, because there's a cavity in the tree, that could mean that that branch or even the trunk of that tree is weak. Okay. Hey, okay, so here's another thing that you'd want to look for. It's at the base of a tree. These are conchs. So sometimes the conchs have a big fin and they get larger, but what it is an indication of decay. So what a conch is, it's a like a fruiting body of a fungus. So you know that there's going to be some decay. Also, you got this little area here with all these ants coming out of it. So you know there's a cavity. These ants are living inside. Doesn't mean because there's ants here that you're gonna you can't climb the tree. It just depends on how much decay is in there. So you might want to explore a little bit more before you decide to climb. Okay. So here's another thing that I'd look for. This is a real small one, but it's a girdling root. So what happens is when you buy trees, a lot of times they're in a pot. So the roots will start growing in a circle and they won't come out of it. If you didn't catch it, then you plant it, then it can keep these roots and they're just going to grow thicker and end up choking out the tree. So over here on this side, you've got a good trunk flare, so it comes open wide. Then the trunk flare starts to like taper off, and then if you go to this side here, it's pretty flat. So it could be that maybe there's a girdling root underneath it. So one of the things that I would probably look for is the trunk flare. And now if it's a good solid trunk flare, it's open wide, there you gotta, then you know it's more stable. Now these girdling roots here, that could have caused that side to be flat. That's something else I'd look for. Okay, so another thing I'd look for is trees that have a lean. And I mean, there's a lot of trees that'll have leans, and it doesn't mean that they're unstable. But if it had a lean, and say on the back side of the lean, if it was, the soil was raised up, so if I would go over here and it was raised, and you could stomp on this side and you feel vibration, well, that would mean it's a sign of movement. So, you know, you got a straight trunk, and then this would be raised, and then on this other side, you'd have like almost like a bowl. Completely super easy way to tell that a tree has movement. Actually, this one has a flat side and another flat side. That's more likely a solid tree. Even though it has a lean, it could have been planted and just grew in that direction. So yeah, seems like this one's solid, but that would be one of the things I would look for. So here's another situation. If I had to climb something like this, this had 2 leaders on it. One was cut, one kind of broke out of it. But then, like, you don't know how much area is like decayed or missing on this side. Anyhow, it has a big lean, and there's not a lot of strength on this side. So I mean, that would be something that I would really question if I even wanted to climb. So another thing that I'd look for is at the base of a tree. These are a little bit further out, but these mushrooms here, and there's another one that way, and if you walk around the tree a little bit, you'll see just a few more. They're kind of a little bit further out. A lot of times they'll be at the base of the trunk, and a lot of them in the forest. But that could mean that the tree has decay underneath. So if you kind of zoom out and look at this tree, this could be part of the reason why it's got some dieback to it. So, I mean, this is an extreme example, but even a green tree having mushrooms at the base, that would be a concern for me. Hey, so if I was doing the structure of a tree, this is a Chinese elm, and it has a canker. This canker is caused by anthracnose. So what it does is it kind of kills the living tissue, and it kind of makes an area that looks like that. If you go to your left a little bit, you could see at that crotch, there's another canker right there. Now if that guy was larger, that could make that whole branch weak. You know, that size maybe not, you'd be okay. If you go a little bit above it, there's another one on the branch above it. And also if you go over to your left on that branch, there's one underneath. So it has cankers. It doesn't mean that it's completely a weakened tree, but if I was going to climb it, I'd want to be aware of it, and I'd make the decision if I really do want to climb it. So if it was like at that crotch and it was huge, well, I probably wouldn't climb on that limb. Say if it was really high up, I would be really wary of that. Another thing that I'd look for, so if I was scanning the canopy, it's really simple to see. It's a broke hanging limb. You're kind of looking throughout, you'll see a few other hangers. Yeah, so if I'm scanning the structure of the tree, that's something I'd be noticing. All right. Okay, Noah, so I'm going to perform a tree site inspection. So what I'm going to do is I'll name everything that I'm going to look for, even though it's not here, because it's important to look for all these things. Okay, so I'm going to do it on this Virginia oak over here. So I'm going to stand back here, and I'm going to look all around the top of it. What I'm looking for are electrical wires. Maybe if there was a service drop that goes through the tree. I might even look for guy wires from electrical poles. So then I've already noticed, and I would usually like kind of walk around, make sure that nothing's touching the tree, no electrical lines. Then I'll start walking toward the tree. When I'm walking toward the tree here, I'm going to notice things like above ground objects, and then when I get closer, I'm going to look for in-ground objects. So sometimes there's valve boxes or things in the ground that if you drop a branch and it pokes it, you could really damage it. It would cost a lot of money. So I do above ground, I would look for the in-ground objects. Now I established that there's nothing, or there's a bench here that I have to pay attention to. And then after I notice that there's no electrical wires, there's objects or in-ground objects, now I'm going to look at the trunk of the tree. So now here it looks great. It has a good trunk flare, but I'm going to walk around because I need to see what's around it. I noticed on this side here, it has a pretty good sized girdling root. Doesn't mean that this tree isn't okay to climb, but it's something that I got to pay attention to. The rest of it looks pretty solid. As I'm looking at the base of this, I'm also going to look for the conchs, or if there's mushrooms, or if there's a cavity. I want to make sure that there's none of that. Now I'm also going to look for a lean. If this tree had a lean and it was sunken on one side and raised on another, and if I could go over here and I could stomp on it and it vibrates, that means it has some movement. So maybe I wouldn't want to climb the tree. Right now this looks pretty solid, even though it has a girdling root. So I look around the base here, everything looks pretty good. Then I start working up the tree. Now I'm going to look, when I'm going up the trunk, I'll look for the same kind of thing. I'll look for conchs, because if there's a conch, that does mean that there's some decay. Then I have to distinguish how much decay is there, and I'm all okay to climb it. So right now it looks like a pretty darn solid trunk. I might look for any kind of cracks, cavities. Right now it's solid. From that, I'm going to go upward. Now I'm going to start looking at the structure branches. Now when I'm looking at the structure branches, I want to see that there's maybe no cracks or conchs or anything that's broken. I mean, there's a lot of dead wood throughout the tree. That's not really, I mean, that's what I'd be cleaning up. I'll look for animals. It could be a raccoon nest or something, and I got to pay attention to. And just like on the clip where we saw beehives, I'll look around, I'll see if I see any beehives up there, or wasp nests, or it could be a number of things. And it depends on what area you're in. You could find a lot of different things. Right now it looks good structure-wise. It looks like a pretty good solid tree. So I'd feel comfortable climbing it. There you go. Can you give me a tree site inspection?
Okay, yes, sure. So the first and foremost, you would want to look for anything in the air, such as like power lines or any cables. That is the most important thing when you're approaching a tree, because that could kill you if you don't pay attention to any electricity or cables. But after we see here that there are none, so we can move on to the next step, which would be above ground targets. And here we can see that there's a trash can and a bench. You know, trash cans could usually be moved, but a bench can't. So these are some of the targets that you'd have to pay attention to or watch out from. And after you get the above ground targets, we look for any in-ground targets, which would be like any valve meters or valves that would be in the ground, or anything concealed by a box. You'd have to pay attention to those and take note of those to make sure you don't break them or get fined for doing anything with that. And then after we get the in-ground targets, we move to the base of the tree. So we're going to start working in onto the tree. And then here we can see that the base is it's pretty sturdy. There's no girdling roots, no rot, no mushrooms. If you step on the ground, you can see that it doesn't vibrate. There's no lean in the tree or anything like that. So it's pretty solid of a tree. And then you're gonna go around, make sure you inspect it. So this one looks pretty good. No mushrooms, no rot or anything like that. And then after you do that, you're gonna work your way up through the trunk, work your way up the tree, and then we can see that there's no rot, no cavities, no cankers or anything like that. The bark looks like it's intact. There's no no pests or anything that we have to worry about here. Nothing that is going to concern us with the trunk of the tree. And then now we're going to move up into the structure, which we would look for any kind of the same things, any rot, any cavities, cankers, or any broken branches or rot. And then it's looking pretty good. There's nothing that I would assume that. And then you would look for any pests, such as beehives, maybe a nest that you're trying to preserve, anything that would cause a red flag in that situation. So it looks pretty clear. So yeah, I'm complete.
So we just went over a tree site inspection where we covered electrical conductors, in-ground objects and above-ground objects, tree structure. A tree site inspection really doesn't take very long. It's really important because it's your life. You got to make sure that when you're going to climb a tree, you cover all those objects and do your best to make good judgments. Alright, our next video will be on throwing into the tree. We're just going to throw in with a rope and also a shot bag. Just a couple different ways on how to do it. Take care.